Nebraska, 1949. Written by ZedBelinsky. January 18th, 1949. Snowed last night. That's the second time this week. The old A Ford can't make it to town through this. Hell, the damn thing won't even start. I spent near a whole season's worth of corn to buy her, only for her to sit by idly while we freeze to death. Had I known this, I would have bought more firewood instead. This sure would do us a whole lot better than that rusty piece of junk. Snow so deep, not even the mailman's making his rounds. I can't remember the last time it was this bad. In some parts of the farm, you can lose an entire leg in the stuff. The air is thick with it. My lungs scream every time I breathe in. I can't spend more than 10 minutes outside without losing feeling in my fingers and toes. With so little to do around the farm, I've been checking the stock several times a day to make sure the food's still good. It should last a week or so. Hopefully long enough for the snow to melt under the A Ford's tires so I can resupply in town. January 19th, 1949. Ma used to say, God doesn't give us an obstacle we can't get over. What she didn't mention is the amount of obstacles some have to climb over in order to achieve little success. If God made a place for people to suffer incessantly, then Nebraska's that place. The past growing season has been mediocre at best. The previous years have been average as well. It never seems like it's enough. I always want more. More crops means better living. I can buy more equipment. I can hire more farmhands. I can buy toys and clothes for my children, Sally and Tom. Most importantly, I can buy better whiskey to keep me warm on nights like this. Not that cheap bottom shelf rubbish that burns unpleasantly all the way down. I must push such thoughts away. Greed is a one-way ticket to unhappiness and corruption. I must thank the Lord for what I have. A home. Town's just over 10 miles away, but I'm not ready to make that journey on foot. Not yet. We've still got enough food at the farm, but at this point, I may have overestimated my resources. A trip to town may be needed sooner than I anticipated, but there was a chance I wouldn't make it back. January 20th, 1949. If it was easy, everyone would do it. That's another thing Ma used to say. During these frigid days, her voice has been coming up in my head more often, like a ghost. My family seldom leaves their spot around the fireplace, which gives us light, warmth, and food. I watch from my armchair as Sally and Tom take refuge under a blanket, sharing their body heat like a couple of prairie dogs during hibernation. My wife sits next to them, reading from the book. Sometimes she reads aloud, filling our children's heads with stories of David and Jonah. Other time, she teaches them how to read from it, so their minds are ready when they return to school in the spring. This afternoon, we sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the howling of the wind outside the windows. I dozed off once or twice, imagining the food in the cellar being miraculously replenished by some divine act. I went to check on it like some obsessive madman. I went over it twice to make sure. Yeah, someone's been eating beyond their ration share. I questioned Sally and Tom to the point of tears, who swore on the Lord's name that they haven't been sneaking food. I accused my wife, who also burst into tears at such horrendous accusations. I almost broke out my belt at the lot of them, but stormed out into the cold with a bottle instead. The air cooled my hot blood. Frustrated, I vowed to keep a closer eye on it. Our lives depended on it. January 21st, 1949. I woke up this morning, still feeling sour. Whether it was from the argument or a hangover, I did not know. I wasn't going insane. Something was awry here. I decided to give the old A Ford another try. It was our only hope at this point, and it would give me a chance to clear my head. I did my best to try and crank the damn thing, but it was no use. The engine was frozen solid. The only thing I managed to do was expose my hands to the cold long enough that they started turning blue. I cursed and shouted at the heavens for a sign of hope, but in return, God sent a bitter gust of wind in my face. I kicked the side of the A Ford and stormed off, not really certain of my next task. I walked around the yard, turning things over in my mind. I had to do something. Waiting around was no good. I went into the barn to check on the cows. They seemed all right, much happier than me. Our oldest, Betsy, lowed while I stroked her flank. She was getting old. A morbid thought entered my head in the voice of my mother. Old Betsy could save us. The old gal had 3 more seasons of milk left in her, if that. She could see us through this bitter winter. I shook the thought away as quickly as it came. No, Betsy was my first. She was a reminder of how much sweat and blood I had put into this land. She's been through a lot with me. Still, the idea kept pestering me like a mosquito. Perhaps. When I left the barn, I turned toward the back of the end of the house. I suddenly uttered a cry of surprise. There were footprints in the snow. They came from the cornfield and led toward the back steps into the house. I couldn't tell what made the tracks, beast or man. Whatever it was, it had dragged its feet through the snow. How long have they been there? Who made them? I rushed into the house and looked around. My family looked at me with confusion. I interrogated them if they had gone outside these past few days. They assured me that they were inside the whole time. I should have believed them, but the rational man in me did not. Imbued by the anger of the rational man, I beat them until one of them confessed. They didn't. Again, I stormed off onto the front porch and finished a bottle of whiskey. My anger subsided somewhat and new thoughts arose. If not them, then who? Supper was silent that night. I opened a new bottle and had that for dinner. I let my children have my serving as my penance. They graciously accepted. It was the least I could do for falsely beating them earlier that day. The cabbage soup we were drinking tasted mostly like water anyway. I thought of Betsy for a moment. How good she would taste in a nice warm stew. My mind kept drawing back to those footprints. Footprints that lead into the house, but no tracks that return to the cornfield. I had checked the house thoroughly 2 times without finding any sign of life. I wondered if they had anything to do with the shortage of food. With God as my witness, I would get to the bottom of this. January 22nd, 1949. I woke before dawn from a horrifying dream. I was in my bed with my wife, but we were not alone. There was someone else in here. At first the dream seemed so real, I thought it was Sally or Tom asking to sleep with us. When I tried to get up, my body didn't want to work. I could only look upon the stranger in the bedroom. Couldn't have been a child, for it was much taller than one. It was taller than any man I have ever seen. It was skinny as a post, and I couldn't see its face. I could only see its eyes, which looked hungry and upset. It emitted a low, grumbling sound, like an empty stomach. I woke up, and in a cold sweat, the figure was gone. My wife slept apathetically next to me. Her light breathing was carefree next to my trembling body. I did not fall back asleep. I looked through the house again once the sun came up. Around every corner I saw the figure, as if it had crossed over from my dreams to reality. As the rational man within me expected, I found nothing. There was no sign of the figure, or anyone for that matter. With a grumbling stomach, I decided it was time to milk the cows. I knew something was off before I opened the door to the barn. I felt a sense of uneasiness as I made my way from the house to the barn, but I hadn't been able to put my finger on it until now. I could smell it through the doors. A stench of blood and death. When I opened the doors, I took one look and heaved up last night's supper of whiskey. Something had come into the barn last night and torn apart the cows. An animal of some sort, because no human could have left the cows in the state that they were in now. Mutilated. Their intestines hung, splattered across the ground. Their meat sucked dry to the bone. It was as if a pack of ravenous coyotes had broken in and feasted on their flesh. I tried to vomit again, but all that came up were chunks of mucus. I stared at their carcasses a while longer, then closed the door. I would deal with it later. I thought of the figure from my dreams. Feeling helpless, I attempted to crank up the A-Ford again with no success. I felt my gnawing stomach beg for food. I thought about trying to salvage some meat from the slaughtered cows, but I couldn't get myself to do it. I didn't tell my wife about what had happened. She suspected something was wrong, but wouldn't press me for it. She would just stare at me inquisitively while I brooded over the fireplace. We were in trouble. Our resources have been severely shorted with the death of the cows. Their milk was important to our survival. I needed to get it to town as soon as possible. I felt an urge to get my family away from this farm, but there was no way Sally and Tom could make the journey through the snow. My only choice was to pray and wait it out. Something dangerous was afoot, something sinister. My thoughts kept lingering on the figure in my bedroom. Hunger. January 23rd, 1949. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. I slept in today. No harrowing figures haunted me. My dreams were pleasant, and consisted of great banquet halls with mountains of food and liquor that flowed like water and tasted like nectar. Then there was darkness. I was awoken from my state of delight by the cries of my wife. Her sobs came from Sally and Tom's room. They are dead. Their bodies have been mutilated like the cows in the barn. Their bones were picked clean. There was not a drop of blood in sight. It was as if their flesh and muscle had just vanished. I dug a shallow grave for what remained of Sally and Tom in the backyard. The earth was frozen and unforgiving. I would rebury them once the ground thawed, but for now this would do. I placed 2 crosses in the ground, one for Sally and one for Tom. The footprints from the other night were still there, not far from the graves of my children. I swear to God I was heartbroken by the sudden tragic deaths of my children, but the feeling of hunger was too great, and it overpowered my bereavement. That's enough writing for now. I can't think of anything else. I'm starving, and I must eat soon.